Welcome to a brand new 12-week series of Rich Planet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Rich Planet TV is a fully independent show which does not accept as truth most of the unevidenced reporting in mainstream media and attempts to get past their perception management strategies in order to get closer to the truth about what is going on this planet. If you're not interested in the truth, then please switch channels now. One thing I will point out before we get the show underway is that Rich Planet has produced over 200 hours of films and TV shows, all available to watch online from richplanet.net. Some of this material has not been allowed on television, even though it is evidence-based. Find in-depth films about the Cumbria shootings and the Madeleine McCann story and many other issues from the links on the screen. This week's guest is the author of the blog website The Truth Seeker's Guide. For over 5 years, he has discussed subjects like mind control, ufology, false flag events, social engineering, psychological warfare, health, energy, and consciousness. Recently, he has specialized in esoteric and occult symbolism in the output of the mainstream media. In 2013, he published his first book, Science Fiction and the Hidden Global Agenda, which examines the connections between famous science fiction writers, directors and producers and the machinations of the global elite. He has given a number of talks at alternative knowledge venues in the UK. Welcome, Carl James.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
All right then, Carl. Now, we're going to talk today about Stanley Kubrick and your research into his work. Now, I covered the issue of the moon landings with Andrew Johnson in two previous TV shows. If you want to look those up, that's show number 145 and 146. And Andrew presented a great deal of evidence which casts massive doubt over whether the moon landings were as reported. Let's just put it that way. Now, in those interviews, we mentioned Stanley Kubrick and his front projection system, which he developed in the 1960s, which some say was used as the sets for the moon landings. But before we get into that, just give us some background on Stanley Kubrick and who was Stanley Kubrick?
He was a very eccentric character. He was a bit sort of anal in the way he made his films. I think he only ever made sort of 13 sort of big films. I think he did a couple of documentaries and sort of low budget films beforehand, but because he was so meticulous about the way he made his films, it took him years between films. So everything in his films was put where it was for a specific reason. He drove the cast and crew bonkers with sort of repetitive shots and things like that. So he really was, everything that's in his films that I would argue is there for a reason. It indicates something. And he was also a very well-connected man as well. He had a lot of what I would call establishment connections, people high up and...
Right. Now, so what you're saying is he was so pedantic that, let's say there's just an ornament or something on a set, it's going to have a reason for being there.
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
And you've looked at a vast amount of information.
Yeah, there's plenty of evidence of that, yeah.
All right. Because people might say, well, why are you bothering to look at this? What's the point? Why are you looking into his background? If it is a lie, the moon landings, if they were faked, as a lot of people now believe, it's a massive lie. As Bart Zabrell said, it's a satanic lie. And it needs to be exposed. So looking into the background of Kubrick is important. Now you've split your research up into 3 areas. I'll just tell the viewers what they are, and then we'll go down into each one. There's the connections that Kubrick had with certain key people who were linked to NASA and other organisations. The clues in the films themselves, as we've just
predominantly
mentioned.
The Shining is the main film, but there are clues in other films as well.
And also other films that have been produced which put forward the case that Kubrick was involved, but do it in a really bad way to make people think that no, he wasn't really involved. Kind of a limited hangout. So what connections did he have?
First of all, I wanted to sort of quote from this article that it's called Dr. Strangelove, a strange and terrible glimpse into the deep state. I don't know the name of the author, but it really sums up Kubrick, sort of where he is. Basically, the author says Kubrick seems to have been aligned, probably very loosely, with what I like to refer to as the Anglo-American establishment, when typical conspiracy theorists rail against the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the international bankers, the Morgans, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds and so forth. This is essentially who they're referring to. But this is not the only power elite within the international community or even the United States itself. One of the most compelling aspects of Dr. Strangelove is its nuanced view of the American power structure and the confirmation it gives of a divide within the structure of the organisations. So certainly if you look at Dr. Strangelove, which is a real condemnation of the military-industrial complex, you can sort of see that he's allied sort of to a group that opposes that sort of...
So Dr. Strangelove was a 1960s film which preceded
early 60s,
his 2001
That's
film.
right, yeah.
And just give us a brief outline of what it was about.
Basically, it's just showing the ineptitude of the people in power, and it instigates that they instigate a nuclear war, basically, and the end of the world, and the total incompetence of everybody involved, the Russians, the Americans, and no one has a clue what anybody's doing, and who holds the keys, basically, to setting off the bombs and that, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Did Kubrick then actually make certain connections with high-up people in the making of that film then?
He did, yes, yeah. I mean, one of his consultants was this chap called Alistair Francis Buchanan, who's the director of International Institute for Strategic Studies, which is effectively connected to the Round Table Group, Kissinger, the Rothschilds, that sort of thing. And he actually pointed Kubrick to the film's the source of the inspiration for the film, which was Peter George's novel Red Alert. Peter George was also known as Peter Bryant, and he was a British intelligence officer as well. So,
right.
Also a couple of other things. Sterling Hayden, who played Brigadier General Jack Ripper in the film, had an extensive career in the OSS, which is the precursor to the CIA as well. So, yeah, there's a few connections there, even at that point. So,
right. And then we come on to 2001, The Space Odyssey. So I understand that Kubrick consulted people at NASA for this. So what would the reason for that be then?
It's basically been put across that he wanted it to be as accurate as possible. He wanted it to sort of reflect what was going on with NASA at that time. He wanted it to be sort of an extension of the technology that NASA was allegedly creating at that point. So, so he brought on a lot of people involved with NASA. Clark himself was heavily involved with NASA. He had high connections in NASA, but he had these two principal scientific advisors on the film, Frederick Ira Ordway III and Harry Langer. Ordway was a former member of the American Rocket Society, space scientist, and author of technical books about spaceflight. He worked with ballistic rockets until 1960, followed by 3 years at Marshall Space Flight Center. So he was, you know, and Langer was an illustrator and designer for the aerospace industry, head of NASA's Future Projects section, worked with Wernher von Braun on nuclear propulsion ideas like that, space platforms. So they're well connected chaps.
All right, and Bertrand Russell?
Yeah. I mean, actually, there's a number of people that.
Who's not so much a technical person, more of a...
there was this group of people that sort of hangers-on consultants for him, and he'd approach them on all kinds of subjects. He was talking about the possibility of AI intelligence because of the Hal character in the film and that. So, and Bertrand Russell, having been involved with the Fabian Society and the Round Table organisation, connections to Tavistock methodology and all that. A couple of other people, Margaret Mead, B.F. Skinner as well, he consulted them. Very, very well connected in that sort of area. Tavistock methodology, that sort of thing. Margaret Mead herself, her husband, Gregory Bateson, was Director of Research at the Veterans Hospital, Palo Alto, involved with MK Ultra mind control research as well. So, you know, she was also involved with this group called the World Federation of Mental Health, which is probably quite well known. And the president of that was Dr. John Rawlings Rees of the Tavistock Clinic and British Psychological Warfare Bureau as well. So,
right. And the film set was visited by senior Apollo administrator George Mueller.
Mueller, yeah.
George Mueller, and an astronaut.
Yeah, Deke Slayton, yeah.
And the documentation of the visit was classified secret at the time.
It was, yeah, which is very peculiar. I don't know exactly when it was classified and when it was declassified, and it looks as though it was available from about 1975 onwards. It was certainly available from about 1996. Yeah, so there's this photograph of Deke Slayton, George Mueller, Fred Ordway, Clark and Kubrick walking across the lot. And apparently George Mueller said that he called the place NASA East, based on all the technical equipment that was there and the paperwork, documentation, all that. But that photograph and some of the paperwork associated with it was classified with this memo dated June 4th, 1965, for the attention of Eric Goldman, special consultant for Lyndon Johnson. And basically in the document they're talking about Kubrick being this profoundly influential film director, and they were considering him for involvement in this film festival that was going to go on at the White House. So it was a very politically orientated thing. I don't know whether he actually did attend. Production was quite, you know, by 64 the production of 2001 A Space Odyssey was already up and running.
Right.
I think it was released in 68, so it's a good sort of 4 or 5 years that it was
so
going on.
over a number of years, over sort of a 4-year period then,
yeah.
Kubrick's got all these connections within NASA, and he's in, the set is called, what did he say?
NASA East.
NASA East. Yeah. And then in 69 we had the alleged moon landings.
Yeah.
So you've created quite a good case there for that he was clearly very well connected.
Yeah, I mean,
with NASA and all.
Yeah, I mean, can I just say as well that in terms of the companies that were actually involved with it, I'll just quickly read out what Frederick Ordway actually said about it. Yeah, Frederick Ordway basically said, we relied heavily on advice from NASA. A considerable number of private companies, found myself visiting General Electric, Missile and Space Vehicle Department, the Bell Telephone Laboratories, Whirlpool Corporation, Honeywell, which I think now is associated with JPL and NASA, IBM as well, and those cooperative arrangements were began in New York and then they were carried over to the production in England as well. So it's a lot of companies heavily involved with the production of it.
All right, and Carl, well, we're going to go to the first break, and after the break we're going to talk about some of the clues in Kubrick's films. Welcome back. I'm talking to Carl James about his book, Science Fiction and the Hidden Global Agenda. Now then, Carl, you mentioned his some of Stanley Kubrick's connections, and one of them was to someone from the CIA. So this is Alfred Hubbard, yeah?
Yeah.
So just tell us about him.
Well, basically the story goes that he introduced Kubrick to LSD, and Hubbard is known to have been a key player in the CIA's LSD distribution network, and he was a high-level officer in the OSS as well. He was allegedly involved with the Manhattan Project, and he also worked for NASA via a subcontractor called Teledyne, which was a defence subcontractor during the 60s. And what basically that he did was testing psychochemical agents on astronauts and pilots for the US Air Force and NASA and that. So it's interesting what some people have said about the NASA astronauts, you know, this idea of possible mind control program and that sort of thing. And you've got sort of NASA closely connected with somebody who's actually doing that sort of thing, testing.
Well, the Apollo 11 astronauts certainly looked like they were under mind control in their press conference when they came back from, well, when they allegedly came back from the moon. All right, well, let's look at some of the clues in the films, Carl.
Yeah.
And just to reiterate, this guy is not someone who's just putting something accidentally in his. He's in charge of every minute aspect of dressing the set. Including choosing the carpets, choosing people's clothes, everything. Right?
Some directors wouldn't get that level of involvement, but I mean, he drove the crew mad with his level of involvement. He really did. He was just.
And he's someone who's probably thinking on different levels as well.
I would say so.
Right. Yes. Just tell us about.
Well, I mean,
because this has been covered in feature-length films by other. You just want to touch on that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, Room 237 is a documentary that talks about the symbolism in The Shining, and it actually features the researcher Jay Widener in it as well. And he does put across, given the limited amount of time he's got to appear in, he puts across some points that that he's covered in his own films, like Kubrick's Odyssey, which is an interesting one. Talks about the front screen projection as well. Yeah, I mean, I can come on to some of the more questionable ones in a minute, but I mean, people do forget sometimes that 2001 itself, although it's a story about the possibility of extra, it is essentially a story about a cover-up, because you've got the American scientific military establishment covering up the existence of this monolith on the moon, and the signals coming in from the vicinity of Jupiter, really, and basically the government in it, they feel no obligation to inform the citizens. They talk about how the secrecies, explain it away. claimed that public awareness could lead to panic and all this kind of stuff. So it's essentially a film about a cover-up.
Right.
Forget that, you know.
Right. A man-made object somewhere in the solar system.
Possibly, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if we've gone to The Shining, because what you would possibly claim is that Kubrick was very uncomfortable, if indeed he did film some of the hoaxed moon landings, very uncomfortable that he'd been asked to do that.
That's the contention,
and
yeah.
He can't possibly speak about it because he'd get murdered.
Well, I mean, some people say that eventually did happen to him, but yeah.
So he's trying to tell everyone about this using a different layer in particular in The Shining. So just tell us what the clues are then.
It's subtext, really. I mean, there's been a number of researchers have pointed out loads and loads of examples, so I'm not sort of pointing out anything original here. This is what a lot of other researchers have put. There's this scene where Jack Nicholson's character, Jack Torrance, is interviewed by the manager, and people say that's a metaphorical sort of his induction into whatever NASA was getting Kubrick involved with. The presence of the eagles in the film, there's one on Jack Torrance's t-shirt, there's one in the office in the window. People say like the eagle has landed. Also the typewriter that he types all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy on it, you know. That's an Adler typewriter, which the word for Adler in German word is eagle, basically. In German it's Adler. In the room where the typewriter is, there's these Indian totems that are painted on the wall. I don't know if they're like a tapestry or something like that, but they're basically, some people say they look like the Saturn V rockets taking off. There's also this really interesting scene where Torrance's son, Danny, is sitting playing with his toys on the carpet in the corridor. He's got a jumper on, which has got a white rocket on it, which is Apollo 11 USA on it. Some people say that the hexagon pattern on the carpet vaguely resembles the Saturn V launch pad and things like that. So
the bit on the typewriter, was that meant to be a euphemism for Apollo?
Some researchers claim that, yeah. Some people say that. I mean,
and why would that spell out Apollo?
I think it's just because of the similarity that the ALL is like A11, Apollo 11. So Apollo work all makes Stanley Kubrick a dull boy. And so I think it's Jake Widener that's concerted that.
Right. All work and no play.
No, well, all Apollo work, Apollo 11 work and all play makes Kubrick a dull boy. Yeah, basically.
Right. I see. Yeah. Now, but there's also numbers in the key of the one of the room.
Yeah. It's room 237, and Jay Widener again has said that he claims that the average distance between the Earth and the Moon at the time of the film being made in the American Heritage Science Dictionary measured as 237,000 miles, which is room 237. I know now the contemporary measurements are sort of more around the 238, almost like 239.
Now let's just expand on the front projection system, because I think this is something that people can actually look at and check out, because is it Jay Widener who's made a whole film about this? Yeah,
Kubrick's Odyssey. Yeah.
Front screen projection is a cinematic device that allows scenes to be projected behind the actors so that it appears in the camera as if the actors are moving around on the set provided by the front screen projection. The process came into fruition when the 3M company invented a material called Scotchlite. This was a screen material that was made up of hundreds of thousands of tiny glass beads. These beads were highly reflective. In the front screen projection process, the Scotchlite screen would be placed at the back of the soundstage. The plane of the camera lens and the Scotchlite screen had to be exactly 90 degrees apart. A projector would project the scene onto the Scotchlite screen through a mirror, and the light would go through a beam splitter which would pass the light into the camera. An actor could stand in front of the Scotchlite screen and he would appear to be inside the projection. None of what you were seeing in the 8-man scenes at the beginning of 2001 was actually shot outside. The scenes that surround the 8 men in 2001 are actually slides of a desert being projected onto the Scotchlite screen standing at the rear of the set. As part of the trick, it becomes necessary to place things in between the screen and the set to hide the bottom of the screen. I have photoshopped a line differentiating the set and the background Scotchlite front projection screen. Please note how everything is in focus, from the pebbles on the ground in the set to the desert mountains beyond. Let's examine a few NASA Apollo images now. This is a still from Apollo 17. This is also a great example of the front screen projection process. Again, I have photoshopped a line indicating the back of the set. One can see that there is a slight uprising behind the rover, which is hiding the bottom of the screen. Also notice that even though everything is in focus, from the lunar rover to the mountains in the background, there is a strange change in the landscape of the ground right behind my lines. This is because the photo of the mountains being used on the front projection system has a slightly different ground texture than the set. As we go on, we will see that this fingerprint is also consistent throughout the Apollo images. Here's another Apollo image. Now here is my version where I show the line between the set and the screen. Not all lunar surface shots are using the process. Sometimes the astronauts are just standing on the set with a completely and suspicious black background. The early missions, Apollo 11 and 12, used the front screen projection system only when they had to. But as the missions went on and they had to look better, Kubrick began to perfect the process.
So at the time, it was the state-of-the-art
pioneering technique,
technique to film something inside and make it look outdoors.
Effectively, yeah. Providing you got the photography of the background right, you could,
right.
Yeah.
So if the moon landings were filmed on Earth, then that's going to be the thing that they probably would have used.
Possibly. I mean, you've got to consider what they would have used as the backdrop. I mean, if they're going to make it look like it's actually the moon, you know, they're going to have something to work with. But of course, even when you look at the images of the moon, there's inconsistencies in the mountain ranges and things like that in the background. So, and also you've got this differential between the foreground, almost like rough foreground, smooth background, like a differentiating line between the two, which some people argue would, if that was the technique that was being used, it would be the differential between what was real in the foreground and the projection. Changing over to the projection in the background.
They can never match the artificial background texture.
Not exactly, no,
to the actual
there would be giveaways,
studio set. And well, I think Jay Weidner actually draws this line between the set and the backdrop in some of the NASA images. So if anyone's going to be a candidate for having filmed these things, it is Kubrick. Now, I don't think mainstream have really covered this issue correctly or fairly. And a good example of that was this discussion program on, I think it was Channel 4.
Channel 4, yeah.
Channel 4.
Yeah.
It was hosted by John Ronson. And featured various UFO-related or moon hoax researchers at the time. Just tell us about that, Carl.
I mean, I don't want to sort of really put any sort of blame on any of these people involved, because I mean, I have tried in a limited fashion to contact them and see if they can confirm whether Kubrick was actually talked about in this program. Well, basically, it went out on 25th February 1997. David Percy, Mary Bennett, Barry Reynolds, Matthew Williams, Andy Thomas and Marcus Allen. So, I mean, you've got a good stock there of people who've done research into the moon hoax. And they talk about this scene in Diamonds Are Forever where there's this moon buggy and a fake moon set, which probably most people would be familiar with that. And they do talk sort of generically about disclosure in Hollywood films, but they don't mention Kubrick at all.
Well, it's a James Bond movie, and people say, what's that scene doing in there? He walks into this lab, and they're going to the moon, and he says, I've come to inspect your radiation shields. Okay, and the next thing he does, he walks out of the lab onto a moon set with astronauts bouncing around and phony backgrounds to it.
And a studio.
That's right, it's a complete studio.
I remember the
and
scene.
he ends up being chased out of this set.
Leaping
so you have a
onto the
connection
rover and rushing off.
in a James Bond movie.
Society does not mean to say either that it's a democracy.
Because Ronson's actually made films about Kubrick.
Yes, he has. He made a film called Kubrick's Boxes, Stanley Kubrick's Boxes. He interviewed his widow, Christiane Kubrick, for the Guardian newspaper as well. I mean, he's done a lot of... He's a big fan of Kubrick, very big fan of Kubrick.
So in these interviews that Ronson is hosting, and frankly is very patronising in my opinion, and some of his attempts his quips at some of the guests are, in my opinion, desperate. And he actually says, he turns to, I think it's David Percy, and he says, surely the natural progression of your investigation would be to try and find out the people who took the photographs where the moon landing was faked. The television studio. Have you never been interested in trying to discover that? He says that.
Yeah, that's it,
right? But then there's no discussion of Kubrick.
No, that's right.
So it's got to have been removed from that programme, which is what mainstream media do. They get a whole load of people who are interested in a particular issue, they film them for 5 hours, and then they put 1 hour out of what they want people to see. And that's what I suspect happened with that program.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that it was edited out, you know, but nothing's ever been mentioned about it. I'd like you, because there are so many things about John Ronson as well that I would. So you know, okay. I mean,
I'm not expanding
But so there's a big sort of question hanging over it. I can't understand, but given what I've come to understand about the way the Kubrick sort of Apollo connection is discussed, if it did happen, I wouldn't be entirely surprised. I mean,
All right then, Carl, we're going to go for another break and we'll continue this discussion in a few minutes. Welcome back. I'm talking to Carl James about his research into the background of Stanley Kubrick, who many people say was used to film the hoaxed moon landings, which were actually possibly filmed on Earth. Now, one of the most important things in your research, Carl, was to try and discover the first reference to Stanley Kubrick being involved in the moon hoaxes.
Or allegedly being involved.
Allegedly. And various stuff was put out in the 1990s to suggest that this sort of idea came around in the 1990s.
Yeah, it's just new at that point, but it wasn't.
Tell us what you've discovered.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I actually fell for to some degree as well. You know, I needed to do a lot more research and find out, but basically, what I call a limited hangout, effectively. It's a bit like sort of 9/11 and ufology, that sort of. You have these limited hangout, and they're pushing this time frame that it's there in the 1990s.
Because there was a documentary made called The Dark Side of the Moon, which you call a mockumentary.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people say
it had all of these important people in it, like Kissinger and Donald Rumsfeld and a whole load of others, and even Kubrick's own ex-wife or widow. So just give us a quick summary of that, because a lot of people they'll watch that on YouTube and they'll see the flaws in it and they'll go, well, yeah, he didn't really do it, did he? Or there's confusion over it.
Yeah,
so
it can mislead people in any number of ways. I mean, you can look at it and say, well, this is just so ridiculous. It is obvious that it's faked. I mean, you only have to look at the people involved in it. I mean, certainly at least 7 of the people that are alleged, and they're actually the only ones that mention Kubrick in it. They're all actors playing characters, and it's not hard to see that. I mean, the giveaways, they're in the names. I mean, one of the alleged whistleblowers in it is called Dave Bowman, which is the name of the character from 2001, the commander of the ship, and Dmitry Muffley, Dmitry is and Muffley, the respective leaders of the US and Russia in Dr. Strangelove. You know, Jack Torrance is the name of Jack Nicholson's character in The Shining. So these are the people that they're saying that these are these people. You know,
but this isn't a low-budget documentary, is it?
No. I mean, it was produced for
This is like a mainstream documentary that's got obviously a lot of research in it and a lot of preparation.
Yeah. It was Franco-German TV network RT, not Russian RT, ARTE 2002, called Operation Loon. So it went out on a fairly mainstream channel in France. And it's,
in that film, although they weren't directly referring to Kubrick, they've been taken out of context. You've got Rumsfeld and Kissinger. They've not actually complained of the been in that.
No, they haven't. No. I mean, the source for it is not widely known, but I have been able to track it down.
What you did was you've compared another documentary with several of the people in that documentary and proved that they've stolen footage from another
documentary. I've compared the two. I haven't been able to sync up the exact sections that they're talking, but you only have to look at it. They're wearing the same clothes, the same room that they're sitting in, same hairstyle, same background, everything, same lighting, and they're talking about political leaders.
So what they've done, they've picked up what was left on the cutting room floor from one documentary.
But it was directed by William Carroll, the same chap who directed.
Right. Okay.
So he's used his own material previously. You know. Yeah. But again, like you say, they never objected to it. They didn't seem to care about the fact that this footage had been reused.
And let's be clear, that documentary is trying to assert that Kubrick was involved. But doing it in a completely debunkable way.
Basically.
Why would they need to do that?
Yeah. And then for credibility as well, they bring on Christiane Kubrick, his widow, Jan Harlan, his brother-in-law as well. And they're talking about, I mean, they don't say too much, but they do, you know. But then there's this article afterwards called More Than a Hoax by Henry M. Taylor. And she apparently said she did it just good fun.
Right, yeah, like you do.
So, I mean...
Like your dead husband, you're going to make a fake documentary saying that he faked the moon missions and I just did it for good fun.
I mean, certainly you could argue, play devil's advocate on this one. At the time, there was some retroactive sort of look at Kubrick. The estate, the family, they were trying to paint him. He was a very sort of surly character. He was apparently a very loving person as well, you know, but he pissed a lot of people, say that, he pissed a lot of people off, basically, you know, and he was very temperamental. He had some very bizarre behaviour sometimes, and I think they wanted to sort of redress that in the public eye, make him look like this gentle giant, you know, so maybe they were trying to do it in that regard, but, you know. Before
we tell the viewers when was the first time someone has suggested Kubrick was involved, let's just discuss this clip from Alexei Leonov, who was a Russian cosmonaut. Tell us about that.
Yeah, basically he was interviewed in 2009 on RT News, which is a questionable source anyway, but that one. He talks about the official story of NASA. He's poo-pooing anybody that questions it whatsoever. Then all of a sudden, he starts discussing the claim that Kubrick was involved in Apollo fakery. I'll just play you this clip.
The United States are often accused of not actually going to the moon and faking the images from there. What's your take on that?
The rumour started when Kubrick's wife commented on her husband's work. She said that it was very difficult to make the film about Americans landing on the moon. Well, it is understandable. There are 2 ships left on Earth. One is at the Smithsonian Museum. It is not allowed to even take pictures there because the displays there are extremely valuable. And the second ship, the exact copy, is in Hollywood. So he did some of the shots there, things like landing, opening of the hatch, because otherwise viewers would not get the whole picture. So that's how the rumour about the landing on the moon footage being fake started. 2 people even went to prison for false witness.
So a Russian cosmonaut is actually saying, no, Kubrick didn't fake the moon landings, or he did a little bit of work on it.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, he sort of does actually. I mean, but basically what he says, and he speaks in Russian, but I've confirmed that he is saying what the translator is saying. He said that Kubrick utilised an exact copy of the LEM located in Hollywood, did some of the shots there, things like landing, opening the hatch, because otherwise viewers would not get the whole picture. And at the end of it, he talks about these 2 people who are going to prison for bearing false witness. I've never heard that story. I don't know.
So NASA go around telling Russian cosmonauts about how they faked or faked their photographs. Well, that's what this cosmonaut is saying.
I don't know how he got hold of the story, but
well, there's no other mention of it anywhere.
No. And that's the strange thing, is because he's been around for 5 years. I've not ever read any of his official biography or anybody speculating about his life. And funnily enough, moon hoax researchers don't really talk about it either. It's been there, so I don't.
But RT want to talk about it.
Well, yeah, I mean they're limited hangout as well, I would say. So.
Right, yeah. Julian Assange and all the rest.
Yeah.
Okay, so when was the first time somebody suggested Kubrick may have been involved?
I've got it down now to about a year after Apollo 11, 1970. In black and white in my hands, not physically here in my hands now, but I have in possession an original 1976 copy of Bill Casey's book, We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 Billion Swindle. And I'll just read you a short section. So page 28, he says, while 2001 was being filmed, Kubrick and his crew consulted with nearly 70 industrial and aerospace corporations, universities and observatories, weather bureaus, laboratories, blah, blah, blah. Had this been done for the Apollo space program without the cover of 2001, much speculation would have been directed towards the making of these inquiries. Another aspect of the release of 2001 in 1968 is this: the film prepared the American people for filmed versions of space exploration. It would be a simple transition from a huge manned orbiting lab gyrating to the strains of the Blue Danube, as in the film, to a prosaic view of 2 men taking a stroll on the moon. That's 1976. And I've also been able to prove now that he was researching and doing radio interviews in 1970 that he was discussing this. So this is a year after Apollo 11 that he's a possibility of a connection. He's not saying.
Right. And do you know what his sources were? Do you know? Or?
I know that he worked for Rocketdyne, a division of North American Aviation, and later for Rockwell International between 1956 and 1963, where the Saturn V rockets engines were built. And he was also a head of technical publications for the company, so maybe that was where he got his.
The other information that was trying to say that these theories only came out in the 1990s.
That can be debunked there at that point. Yeah.
Right. So it's difficult to understand why mockumentaries, as you describe them, or other information, which is poisoned information, if you like, is put out about Kubrick.
and why they would want to
why would they want
create
to do
a
that?
specific time frame for it as well. I mean, I've got my theories that it's based on roughly the timing of when the internet became publicly available, you know, ISPs and that available to the public, you know. So you've got an easier way of spreading disinformation than at that point. Maybe it's the timing of that, but I don't know.
Right, it's time for a break now, and after the break we're going to talk about one of Kubrick's last film, Eyes Wide Shut. Welcome back. I'm talking to Carl James about filmmaker Stanley Kubrick. Now, Stanley Kubrick got an award in the late 90s, a Lifetime Achievement Award, and in that, in his sort of acceptance speech, he refers to this guy D.W. Griffiths, who the award was named after at that time.
He was a film director.
Who directed over 500 films apparently in the very early years of film, and was pioneer in various filming techniques and all that sort of stuff. But he tells this cautionary tale.
I think there's an intriguing irony in naming the Lifetime Achievement Award after D.W. Griffiths, because his career was both an inspiration and a cautionary tale. But Griffith was always ready to take tremendous risks in his films and in his business affairs. He was always ready to fly too high. And in the end, the wings of fortune proved for him, like those of Icarus, to be made of nothing more substantial than wax and feathers. And like Icarus, when he flew too close to the sun, they melted. And the man whose fame exceeded the most illustrious filmmakers of today spent the last 17 years of his life shunned by the film industry he had created. I've compared Griffith's career to the Icarus myth, but at the same time, I've never been certain whether the moral of the Icarus story should only be, as is generally accepted, don't try to fly too high, or whether it might also be thought of as forget the wax and feathers and do a better job on the wings.
There's two morals. There's two possible morals to the story. One is don't fly too close to the sun. In other words, don't rock the boat, or build better wings. If you're going to take on the elite, you're going to need good wings. Now, one thing I did look up on Griffiths was that in one of his later films, it was quite a moralistic film, exposing the effects of alcohol and the damage that alcohol can do with families and that kind of thing. So, because some people say that Kubrick had a, let's say, a good set of morals. I don't know the guy. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. And wanted to perhaps portray that in some of his films. But it's also claimed that you don't get anywhere in Hollywood unless you've got absolutely no morals.
Essentially, So and there's plenty of evidence that you see Hollywood actors and directors talking all the time about you'll only get anywhere unless you're scraping the bottom of the barrel or something. But
which brings us on to the film Eyes Wide Shut. Now, tell us about that one, Carl.
Essentially, it's a story about a problem in this relationship between Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman's characters. And he goes off wandering the streets of New York at night and meets up with an old friend of him who's a musician, who's playing at this sort of like elite gathering. And he manages to get the password to get in there, and he witnesses all kinds of very, very strange stuff going on.
So it's sort of people having orgies with masks on. They don't know who each other are, and there may be children involved. I don't know, maybe sacrifices involved, or whatever it is that they do.
I mean, certainly there is a belief that at least about a few seconds of film. I mean, there's lots of claims that lots of the film has been edited and destroyed, or we'll never see it again. Certainly, if you look at the editing style of the film, but one is known now to have been clipped during the sort of the walkthrough of the orgy, where Tom Cruise sees like a pentagram laid out on the floor. And
let's just spell this out if there's any viewers not quite following. What Carl is saying is that this film is used by Kubrick to try and tell the public what the elite get up to in their secret parties or in their clubs or in their initiation ceremonies that they use to then keep the secret within that elite group. And he's used this film to leak that information that he wouldn't otherwise need to do.
And it isn't just that scene either. I mean, there are so many examples in the film. I mean, certainly you can see examples of characters acting in bizarre behaviour, sort of almost like mind control.
Right.
And you have this scene at the end of the film where their little girl... certainly there's a scene early in the film where the shopkeeper, where Tom Cruise gets his disguise costume to go to the ball.
Which is how he kind of gets away with it, because he's got a mask on.
Yeah, the shopkeeper is effectively selling his own underage daughter to these Japanese businessmen.
Right.
And there's a scene at the end of the film where Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman are talking in a shop with their little girl there, and as the film's closing, you see the little girl being led away by these two men. It's a very, very fleeting scene. And they continue to talk about what's happened with their relationship, and they don't seem to give a damn about what's going on with it. You know, so there are plenty of examples. And there's also some odd things to... Oh, no, I better not talk about that.
So then, what people have said is that Eyes Wide Shut had a whole load of others. Well, I think this has been acknowledged that there was a whole load of material not put in that.
It certainly seems that way, yeah. I mean,
it's actually given a lot more away, but he wasn't allowed to put that in the final edit.
Yeah, yeah.
So, why doesn't Jonathan Ross ask Tom Cruise what was in the real film then when he's on his TV show?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's because people are saying that it is very difficult to sort of find that material and know for certain.
Because Tom Cruise would know, wouldn't he?
He would know, yeah, yeah. I mean, allegedly they saw a much longer cut of the film a couple of days before. I mean, because Kubrick effectively died a few days after the first showing of it to the Warner Brothers executives and Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. And they allegedly did see a longer cut than the final release cut, but they've never actually said what they saw in that version and what was released. But there's allegedly an even longer version, so I mean... The biggest giveaway is his editing style, because it doesn't match. He edited all of his films meticulously. It doesn't match his style of film editing for every other film he's ever made. It's almost like somebody... I mean, people have argued that maybe he didn't finish the film properly and that somebody had to sort of edit it and tidy it up, and that was the reason why. But
yes.
Kubrick was under he certainly gave the impression that the film was finished. There was nothing else to be done with it. There was nothing else to be shot. So.
And tell us about his death, because it came at the end of that film. He wasn't. He was planning another film. Are you? He
was planning on making AI, artificial intelligence, which Spielberg eventually made. And that in itself is a bit of a strange one. This idea of why you would want to create artificial children who never aged. I mean, but that's another subject. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, just a few days after this version of the film was put out there, he died of a heart attack. His family and friends said he was in good health. You know, I mean, people can die naturally of heart attacks with anything being proper. You know, but it does make you wonder. And there's several other things as well, like the fact that the planned, and it was stuck on as well, the planned date of Eyes Wide Shut was July the 16th, 1999, which is 30 years to the day that the Apollo 11 Saturn V rockets were
so
launched.
It seems
so
he's
it kind of ties back into it. So
it seems he's continuing to... Yeah. Would he have decided that date, though, do you think?
I would imagine so, because he had extensive control over his ability. I mean, he pulled his own film, Clockwork Orange, you know, against... I don't know of any other film producer or director who's got the clout to do that from a big studio. Very, very well accredited film, making a lot of money in America, and effectively pulled it from the UK. And
right, so let's just mention that, and we've got a few minutes at the end here, Carl. A Clockwork Orange. He spent a long time directing it and getting it meticulous like he does with all of his films, and then he pulls his own film. That tells me that he was told to pull it. You're not going to pull your own film, are you?
It was out for a little bit, but there was these stories that people were copycat crimes and things like that, and apparently it was only the police went to his door and said it's only going to be a matter of time before these people turn up at your front door and lynch you, basically, Kubrick. And, and that's the official story.
So what do you think? Let's just assume that somebody else told Kubrick that film had to be pulled or censored or whatever. What is that film giving away about the global elite or the agenda in Clockwork Orange?
Ostensibly, I'd say it's mind control, MK Ultra, that sort of thing, because it's the main theme of the film. It's the main thrust of the film. This idea that elite are taking people and just turn them into automatons, you know, or in this case, an aversion to crime. You know, they reprogram the character of Alex to be so repelled by the idea. I mean, he's a rapist and murderer, and he's a central character of the film. You know, it's not exactly a wonderful role model, you know, but And he overcomes that. He effectively breaks that programming again at the end of the film. There was a final chapter in the book that the film was based on by Anthony Burgess, which was like a hopeful character at the end, where he reformed himself and lived a good life. But Kubrick chose not to put that in the film,
Right. And let's just mention Bill Cooper before we close, Carl. Just tell us what Bill Cooper actually said about what he thought Kubrick was representing with this monolith.
I mean, effectively, he's saying that Kubrick is using subtext and analogy to convey knowledge of sort of secret society, symbolism, and the mystery school teachings, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's almost like this sort of, and Jay Widener's called it like an alchemical process. You see the symbolism of the eclipses and the alignment of the planets and all that kind of thing, and it very much ties into that. The association of symbols and that to secret knowledge and all that kind of thing, and certainly there's a lot of sort of Trinity symbolism in the film, the threes and things like that, and there's just plenty of examples of multiples of 3 in the film, and 666 as well, which I mean that's a very misunderstood concept. It certainly usually just gets attached to sort of Satanism and that sort of thing, but I think it's a much deeper indication of occult knowledge there and that sort of thing. So.
Okay then, Carl, so just tell viewers where they can get your book.
Yeah, it's available on my blog. There's a banner link at the top of the website, thetruthseekersguide.blogspot.com. It's also available on your website. It's available through Andrew Johnson's website as well. Check the evidence. There's a free PDF version of the book there for download as well. I am currently doing a rewrite of the book, adding some new material into it and updating a few bits and pieces and that. So that will be available shortly.
All right, then, Carl. Well, thanks very much for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
We'll probably do it again sometime.
Yep. Okay.
And remember, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.